Welcome, dear listener. Welcome to a tale of smoke and whispers, of velvet seats and cold iron wheels. Tonight we find ourselves in the year 1928, aboard the Midnight Continental Express, a grand train that winds its way through the mist-veiled countryside of custom location. Outside, a storm rages. Rain lashes against the windows, and thunder rolls like the growl of some ancient beast. Within the carriages, however, the lamps glow golden. The carpets are plush, and the passengers, though outwardly serene, conceal the secrets of restless souls. Yet tonight the calm will be shattered, for in a sealed compartment, behind a locked carriage door, a most dastardly crime is to be discovered. Stay close, mes amis, for this is the tale of Hercule Poirot and the murder in the sealed carriage. And you, dear listener, will you solve the riddle before the great detective himself? I invite you to try. Chapter 1. The Journey Begins. The Midnight Continental Express was a marvel of its age. A steel leviathan with a heartbeat of steam and fire. On that evening in the year of 1928, it rested at the platform beneath a veil of mist, as though the world itself hesitated to let it depart. The lamps glowed with a buttery light, scattering halos upon the drifting fog, and porters bustled about in muted urgency. Trunks were hoisted, tickets inspected, farewells exchanged in whispers quickly swallowed by the hiss of the engine. Among the passengers, a curious calm held sway, a silence that seemed almost orchestrated by the soft drizzle and the lateness of the hour. The Midnight Express did not convey the common traveler. Its compartments were lined with velvet. Its dining car gleamed with polished brass. Its clientele comprised of the wealthy, the ambitious, and the desperate alike. Each soul aboard carried luggage both visible and invisible, satchels of leather, and secrets bound tighter still. Hercule Poirot, that meticulous Belgian detective with the egg-shaped head and the most resplendent mustaches in Europe, ascended the step of the first-class carriage with a had already marked, in the waiting hall, the cast of characters with whom fate, in her mischievous fashion, might entangle him. Foremost among them was Sir Reginald Ashcroft, the victim whose doom, though yet unimagined, already clung to him like a shadow at dusk. Sir Reginald was a man of 60, perhaps more, broad of shoulder, but stooped by the weight of his own arrogance. His face bore the florid complexion of one accustomed to command and to claret. The eyes were cold, small, and watery, yet darting with perpetual suspicion. He had the voice of a drill sergeant and the manners of a tyrant. Porters scurried under his barked instructions. His valet trailed behind with the expression of a whipped hound. Sir Reginald was known in England as the Titan of steel and rail, the man whose fortune had been built upon the very iron threads upon which this train now rested. But money is a double-edged saber. It commands, and it provokes hatred in equal measure. Poirot, observing him from a polite distance, discerned instantly that this gentleman was feared, but not loved. The mustaches of Poirot twitched as though in silent prophecy. Into the same carriage entered Lady Eleanor Ashcroft, wife of the magnate. Her bearing was one of brittle dignity. She was tall, slender, her face pale as alabaster beneath a wide-brimmed hat of midnight blue. Jewels gleamed at her throat, though she wore them like manacles rather than adornments. In her step was hesitation, as though she approached the carriage with reluctance rather than eagerness. She spoke not a word to her husband. He, for his part, did not so much as extend a hand to assist her ascent. In that silent gesture of omission, Poirot read volumes. A few minutes later came Mr. Henry Blackwood, the business associate. He was a portly gentleman with thinning hair and the permanent flush of one braggadocio of one who has fought battles long since faded into history, but still replays them nightly in the theater of his mind. His mustache was bristling, his voice thunderous, his laugh booming. He had the look of a man who believed discipline to be the cure for every human ill, and brandy the cure for all else. Finally, a figure of elegance and artifice, Monsieur Lucien Moreau, a French dealer in objets d'art. He was lean, dark-haired, and possessed the languid charm of a boulevardier. His hands moved as though caressing invisible canvases, and his speech was laced with sly innuendo and polished courtesy. He carried himself with grace, yet the eyes, sharp as a jeweler's loop, measured and calculated at every instant. Poirot, himself a connoisseur of human eccentricity, regarded Moreau with interest not untinged by suspicion. Thus the dramatis personae assembled. Each took their compartment, exchanged the briefest courtesies, and settled in with the reluctance of strangers who sense instinctively that they will soon be entangled. The whistle shrieked, the train shuddered, and with a sigh of iron, the midnight Continental Express departed the station, vanishing into the fog like a phantom. Inside, the world became a cocoon of warmth and lamplight. The dining car soon filled with the clatter of cutlery and the subdued murmur of conversation. Poirot, ever observant, dined alone, yet his eyes missed nothing. He saw Sir Reginald summon a waiter with the imperious snap of fingers. He saw Lady Eleanor toy with her food in silence. He saw Blackwood gulp his soup as though it were salvation. He saw Colonel Harrington dominate the table with war stories, his voice rising like cannon fire. He saw Moreau lean close to Miss Fairchild, whose nervous smile suggested both flattery and unease. The detective thought to himself, "Ah, the little plays enacted in the theater of the dining car. Each gesture, a clue. Each word, a fragment of truth or falsehood. How swiftly does human nature reveal itself when unimpressed." "You will forgive me," Poirot continued, "if I intrude upon your society only briefly. I seek but a quiet journey, a little repose, and perhaps," he gestured delicately, "a conversation of the pleasant variety." It was at that instant, though none could yet know it, that the delicate threads of destiny had already been woven. The sealed carriage awaited its dark secret. The storm raged on, and Hercule Poirot, mustaches gleaming in the lamplight, sat among them all, watchful, patient, prepared. The night stretched ahead, a corridor lined with locked doors. Somewhere within that corridor, death already whispered, soft as the rain against the glass. Chapter 2. The Carriage Companions. The train pressed on into the night, a steady rhythm of iron against iron, as though the wheels themselves chanted some mechanical incantation. Outside, the rain streaked the windows in liquid lattices, and the darkness of the countryside lay inscrutable, interrupted only by the occasional flash of lightning that threw the world into stark relief. Inside, however, the compartments were warm, the brass fittings gleamed, and the lamplight draped the carriages in amber serenity. It was, as Hercule Poirot observed with his usual satisfaction, a perfect little stage for the dramas of human life. And indeed, the dramatis personae, those curious figures whom fate had assembled for the play, had already begun to reveal themselves in subtle gestures, careless words, and unconscious betrayals. Poirot, seated in the corner of the lounge carriage with his tisane steaming gently before him, surveyed them with eyes that missed nothing, though his lids appeared half-closed in repose. Sir Reginald Ashcroft dominated the atmosphere like a thundercloud in human form. Even in repose, his presence seemed to cast a shadow over the other passengers. He sat in a leather armchair, brandy glass in hand, issuing brusque remarks to the valet who hovered perpetually at his elbow. His voice carried with the sharpness of a saber, and though he addressed no one directly, his criticisms filled the air like invisible smoke. "I have told you before, Hopkins," he growled, betrayed bitterness long suppressed. Her gown of dark blue satin whispered of refinement, but her hands, clasped tightly together, whispered louder of restraint, of anger contained by force of will. At intervals, Sir Reginald directed at her a remark couched in the tones of courtesy, but edged with cruelty. "You will read, Eleanor? Always the novels, the romances, when you might employ your mind to practical affairs, eh?" She answered not, but her knuckles whitened upon the book. Poirot's mustaches twitched. He knew too well that silence could be a mask more revealing than words. Mr. Henry Blackwood, meanwhile, provided a striking contrast. He was a man who perspired perpetually, though the carriage was temperate. He sat hunched over an attaché case which he never released from his grip, even when sipping the brandy that Sir Reginald had so contemptuously insisted he accept. His forehead shone, his collar was limp, and his laugh, when he produced it, rang hollow, as though dragged unwillingly from a place of deep anxiety. Poirot leaned forward gently, offering conversation. "You are, perhaps, in the business world, monsieur?" Blackwood started as if pricked with a pin. "Eh? Yes, indeed. Finance. That is to say, investments, partnerships, ventures." He shot a glance at Sir Reginald, who was already scowling in his direction. "I am privileged to be associated, in some small way, with Sir Reginald here." "Small way?" barked Sir Reginald. "You exaggerate, Blackwood. Your association is as small as it is precarious. Do not attempt to impress this gentleman with false modesty." The flush upon Blackwood's cheeks deepened, though whether from shame or resentment, Poirot could not yet tell. Seated near the window, half hidden by the shadows, was Miss Violet Fairchild. She was of slight build, her movements delicate, as though she feared to take up too much space in the world. Her attire was plain: wool dress, modest hat, gloves carefully mended. Yet there was a certain grace in her simplicity. She listened rather. His booming voice filled the lounge as he recounted tales of campaigns in India, of cavalry charges under a sun like molten brass, of officers felled heroically at his side. He punctuated his anecdotes with great gusts of laughter, and with slaps upon his thigh that made the glasses upon the sideboard tremble. And there I was, by thunder, outnumbered 3-1. Did I falter? Did I despair? No, sir. I charged straight into the thick of it and sent the rascals scurrying like hares. Lady Eleanor, without lifting her eyes from her book, murmured, "How very fortunate for the hares." The colonel reddened, uncertain whether he had been mocked. Poirot concealed a smile behind his tisane. He knew the type: bluster concealing insecurity, nostalgia concealing bitterness. Harrington was not merely a relic of empire. He was a man whose present held little glory, and who therefore clung with desperate strength to the past. And then there was Monsieur Lucien Moreau. He was a study in elegance and calculation. His dark hair gleamed, his suit was of perfect cut, and his voice, soft, lilting, musical, flowed like a melody through the air. He conversed easily with each person in turn, flattering Lady Eleanor with compliments upon her taste in literature, engaging Miss Fairchild with questions about her journey, teasing the colonel with French witticisms that only half concealed their edge. To Poirot he offered a smile of conspiratorial charm. "Ah, monsieur, I perceive in you the man of discrimination, of intellect. Permit me to introduce myself. Lucien Moreau, dealer in the treasures of Europe. Antiquities, objets d'art, the past distilled in beauty. Perhaps, monsieur, you too are a collector?" Poirot inclined his head, not committing himself. "I collect, monsieur, only the little details that others overlook." Moreau's eyes glinted. "Ah, but perhaps those are the most valuable of all, n'est-ce pas?" Thus the company was assembled, and the air between them grew thick with the unspoken, with rivalries and resentments that bubbled beneath the surface. Poirot bearing the scars and ambitions of their lives. And at the center, a man with wealth, power, and arrogance enough to inspire hatred in all. Poirot touched the tips of his mustaches and murmured to himself, "Eh bien, this journey, it promises to be most instructive. One must observe, always, for it is the little things, the nervous glance, the silence too carefully maintained, the words spoken in haste, that reveal the human heart. And where the human heart is revealed, there also, too often, is tragedy." Outside, the rain redoubled its assault, rattling against the glass like 1,000 restless fingers. The train thundered on into the night, bearing with it the sealed fates of its passengers. Within the compartments, each prepared for slumber, yet few found it. Secrets do not sleep, and neither did Hercule Poirot. The stage was set. The carriage companions were assembled. The curtain of mystery hovered, ready to rise. Chapter 3: The Storm Without, the Secrets Within. The midnight Continental Express cut through the night like a steel blade, its headlamps carving pale shafts through the fog and rain. Inside the carriages, lamps glowed steadily, yet their light felt fragile, always at risk of being extinguished by the ferocity of the storm outside. The train swayed and groaned, buffeted by the wind. Every thunderclap reverberated through its very bones, rattling the glasses upon their shelves. Poirot, ensconced in the lounge carriage, felt the rhythm of the train beneath his feet like the heartbeat of some great animal. He sipped his tisane, delicate fingers cradling the porcelain, and watched as the storm revealed its effect upon the company of travelers. For storms, he reflected, strip men and women of their pretenses. The mask of composure falters when nature reminds us how small we truly are. Sir Reginald Ashcroft, however, refused to yield even to thunder and lightning. He sat as though enthroned, brandy glass in hand, his expression defiant. Every crack of thunder seemed to make him louder, more forceful. as though he would out. Harrington roared above the storm with tales of military campaigns, though the audience had dwindled to little more than the unfortunate Mr. Blackwood, who nodded and mopped his brow in turn. And there we were, surrounded on all sides. Did we quail? Did we falter? Not a bit of it. I gave the order, "Advance! Advance!" and by heaven we charged as though the devil himself pursued us. Victory, gentlemen, victory wrested from the very jaws of disaster. The train lurched violently at that moment, as though in mockery, and the colonel's glass of brandy sloshed over his cuff. He swore with military precision, dabbed ineffectively at the stain, and resumed his tale with undiminished vigor. Poirot observed him keenly. The colonel's voice might thunder, but the hand that dabbed at his cuff trembled ever so slightly. Brandy, perhaps, or perhaps something deeper. Some memory of defeat that haunted him behind the tales of triumph. Miss Violet Fairchild sat by the window, her pale face thrown into relief by each flash of lightning. She clasped her hands together so tightly that the knuckles whitened. To distract her, Poirot engaged her in conversation. "Mademoiselle, storms, they distress you perhaps?" She started, then smiled wanly. "A little, monsieur. I do not care for thunder. It reminds me too much of other times." Poirot inclined his head gently. "The past, it leaves its shadows, does it not? But remember, the storm, it passes. It is but a visitor." Her eyes softened with gratitude. Yet Poirot noticed that her gaze drifted, ever and again, to Sir Reginald. Not with admiration, oh no. It was something closer to dread. Mr. Blackwood, meanwhile, perspired more freely with each passing mile. He glanced at his watch repeatedly, as though measuring every second against some secret reckoning. The attaché case never left his side. At last he excused himself with a muttered word and shuffled away down the corridor. Poirot's eyes followed him. There was tension in the man's gait, the tension of one carrying polished shoes making the faintest click upon the carpeted floor. The air was heavy with the scent of tobacco and brandy, with the faint perfume of Lady Eleanor lingering like a sigh. Doors closed one by one, and silence descended, broken only by the storm and the steady pulse of the wheels. At Sir Reginald's door, Poirot paused. The magnate's valet, Hopkins, stood outside with a tray, awaiting admittance. Presently the door opened a crack, and Sir Reginald's brusque tones emerged. "About time. Put it down there. And for heaven's sake, be quiet. I have work to do." The door shut with finality. Hopkins, expressionless, turned away. Poirot's mustaches twitched. Within that compartment, Poirot felt, the storm would not be the only force to rage. Midnight approached. The storm, as though exhausted by its own fury, began at last to abate. Rain lessened, thunder rumbled more distantly, and the train settled into its long stride once more. Yet within the compartments the atmosphere remained tense. Poirot, preparing for bed, could not shake the sense that, beneath the veneer of civility, each passenger carried disquiet in their soul. Lady Eleanor, silent and cold. Blackwood, anxious and sweating. Fairchild, trembling with unspoken fear. Harrington, blustering yet shaken. Moreau smiling too smoothly. And at the center of it all, Sir Reginald, like the lightning rod that attracts the storm's wrath. The little gray cells stirred. Poirot tapped his mustaches thoughtfully. Ah, but it is curious. Such a company, such a storm. One feels, does one not, that the atmosphere is charged, like the air before the bolt of lightning. Yes. One must watch and wait. The truth, she will reveal herself, She cannot be suppressed. He extinguished the lamp. The train thundered on. The weather. He had heard, too, a faint click near midnight, the sound, he thought, of a lock turned with unusual care. He stored it in his memory, one more pebble in the mosaic of the night. Sleep eluded him, as it often did when human drama was near. It was shortly after dawn that the drama erupted. A commotion stirred the carriage, the raised voices of the conductor and Sir Reginald's valet, Hopkins, mingling in alarm. Poirot, already dressed and immaculate, emerged into the corridor to find a knot of passengers gathered at the door of Sir Reginald Ashcroft's private compartment. Hopkins, pale and trembling, knocked again and again upon the panel. "Sir! Sir Reginald! Will you answer, sir?" There was no reply. The conductor, red-faced and flustered, tried the handle. It rattled, firmly locked from within. "What is it, Hopkins?" Poirot inquired softly, though his eyes were already keen with foreknowledge. Hopkins turned to him, distraught. "Sir Reginald, monsieur. He does not respond. I brought his morning tray as always, but he does not answer. I hear no sound within." The passengers pressed closer. Lady Eleanor, pale as the morning itself. Mr. Blackwood, perspiration glistening like dew. Miss Fairchild, eyes wide with dread. Colonel Harrington, blustering that delay was intolerable. Moreau, elegant brows arched in feigned curiosity. The conductor inserted his master key. To his surprise, and Poirot's quiet confirmation, the lock resisted. "Impossible," the man muttered. "The master key should open every door." Poirot lifted a hand. "Stand back, if you please." The conductor shoved his shoulder against the door. After 2 efforts, the lock gave way with a groan, and the panel swung inward. A gasp arose from the assembled company. Sir Reginald Ashcroft sat slumped in his armchair by the window. His once imperious form now seemed oddly diminished, as though the vital force had departed, leaving only a shell. His head lolled at an angle. His waistcoat bore a dark, spreading stain. Upon the floor beside him lay a silver letter opener, its blade crimsoned. The brandy glass, overturned, had spilled its amber contents into the carpet, where it made a pocket watch upon the table beside the chair. Its glass was cracked, and its hand stood arrested at precisely 11 minutes to 12. "The time of death, it would seem," murmured Colonel Harrington. Poirot's eyes flickered toward him. "Perhaps, but one must not leap to conclusions, mon colonel. A watch may be broken for many reasons, and not always by accident." The conductor stammered. "But, monsieur, how can this be? The door was locked from the inside, the window fastened. No one could have entered, no one could have escaped." "Ah," said Poirot softly. "But the impossible. It is merely the thing that has not yet been explained." He rose, surveying the compartment. Upon the latch of the door he observed a faint smudge, dark against the polished brass. Bending closer, he detected the residue of ash. Not cigar ash, he thought, but finer, softer. Perhaps pipe tobacco. He plucked it delicately with his handkerchief and tucked it away. On the edge of the door itself, just where it met the jamb, a small fragment of fabric clung. Poirot teased it free, a shred of violet cloth, silky to the touch. He raised it for all to see. A lady's garment, perhaps, Moreau suggested smoothly. Lady Eleanor's eyes flashed. If you mean to imply, Poirot lifted his hand. I imply nothing, madame. I observe only. The passengers were ushered back, though reluctantly, to the lounge, where the air was thick with shock and speculation. Lady Eleanor sat rigid, her face composed into marble serenity. Mr. Blackwood paced like a trapped animal, dabbing incessantly at his brow. Miss Fairchild wept silently, her slender shoulders trembling. The colonel swore thunderously about damned murderers and demanded immediate action. Moreau lit a fresh cigarette and blew a languid plume of smoke. Poirot entered, hands clasped, expression grave. Mesdames, messieurs, you have seen what lies in the compartment. It is murder. There can be no doubt. And yet murder most curious, for the carriage was sealed, the door locked, the window fastened. Therefore, I begin at once. Returning briefly to the compartment, Poirot instructed the conductor to guard the door and admit no one. He knelt once more beside the body. The position of the chair struck him as curious. Sir Reginald slumped as though surprised, not struggling, not defending. There were no signs of a scuffle, no disorder save the spilled brandy. A man of his temper would surely have fought, cried out, unless the blow had fallen swiftly, from one he trusted, or at least did not fear in that instant. The letter opener itself was of heavy silver, ornate, bearing the Ashcroft crest upon its hilt. A weapon of opportunity, perhaps, rather than premeditated choice. Yet Poirot did not dismiss the possibility that it had been selected with care. He examined the latch again, the ash. Yes, it intrigued him. And the fragment of fabric, violet. He recalled Miss Fairchild's modest dress of gray wool, Lady Eleanor's gown of dark blue satin, but violet. He had seen none such garment that evening, unless perhaps beneath cloak or wrap. Curious indeed. He straightened, eyes narrowing. The little gray cells were astir. A locked room, a dead magnate, a train speeding through the dawn. Ah, yes, it was a puzzle worthy of Hercule Poirot. By the time he returned to the lounge, the passengers were restless with speculation. The colonel paced like a caged tiger, declaiming vengeance. Blackwood muttered of ruination. Lady Eleanor sat composed, too composed, her stillness more telling than hysteria. Miss Fairchild wept softly into her handkerchief. Moreau watched them all with an artist's detachment, cigarette smoke curling about his head like a halo. Poirot entered, his step deliberate, his gaze steady. He regarded them one by one. Mesdames, messieurs, let us be frank. Each of you had your reasons, perhaps, to dislike Sir Reginald, some for business, some for personal causes, some for injuries of the past. Chapter 5. The First Inquiries. The train rattled onwards, cutting a sleek silver path through the dawn. Outside the windows, a soft mist still clung to the fields, reluctant to yield to the pale light of day. Inside the midnight Continental Express, however, the atmosphere was not one of tranquility but of suspense, heavy and taut, like the taut strings of a violin awaiting the stroke of the bow. Every passenger felt it. Every footstep upon the corridor rang with significance. Every word, however trivial, seemed weighted with hidden meaning. In the lounge carriage, Hercule Poirot stood before the assembled travelers, his neat figure immaculate despite the hour, his mustaches waxed to perfection, his eyes sharp with the gleam of purpose. His voice, soft yet commanding, broke the silence. Mesdames et messieurs, murder is an impolite guest. It comes when least expected, and it disturbs the harmony most dreadfully. But murder, you see, does not spring from nowhere. It is planted long before, by motives, by passions, by secrets. Our duty, no, our obligation is to examine each of these. I beg your patience, for Hercule Poirot will ask many questions. They may appear simple, even foolish, but it is often the apparently trivial that reveals the truth. The colonel grunted impatiently. Lady Eleanor raised her chin with dignified hauteur. Miss Fairchild dabbed her eyes. Mr. Blackwood shifted uneasily in his seat. Moreau exhaled a thin plume of smoke, as though life were but a performance in which he played his role to perfection. Poirot inclined his head. We begin, if you please, with Lady Eleanor Ashcroft. Lady Eleanor rose, her slender figure erect, her bearing queenly, even in grief. Her gown of midnight blue rustled faintly as she moved, and the pearls at her throat gleamed pale in the lamplight. Madame, Poirot began courteously, it is not for me to intrude upon your sorrow. Yet I must ask you to describe in your own words the events of last evening. Lady Eleanor's lips pressed tightly before she spoke, schooled. Yet Poirot's eyes lingered upon her a moment longer. Beneath that perfect composure, he saw not merely grief, but calculation. Now, Poirot continued, we turn to Monsieur Blackwood. The solicitor started, wiping at his brow with a damp handkerchief. His round face gleamed with perspiration, though the carriage was cool. He shuffled forward, his spectacles glinting. Mr. Blackwood, Poirot said gently, you were engaged in Sir Reginald's affairs, were you not? Yes, yes, indeed. I acted as his solicitor for many years. His voice was high, nervous. He was a demanding client. Demanding and generous? Blackwood hesitated. Generous, in his fashion, though he liked his terms to be most advantageous. Tell me, monsieur, did you see him after dinner last night? I did, around 11 o'clock. He summoned me to his compartment to discuss some urgent papers. He had been drinking, though he was not yet inebriated. He signed several documents. Afterwards, I returned directly to my own berth. At what time did you leave him? 11:30. Perhaps a few minutes more. Certainly no later than 11:45. Poirot's brows lifted ever so slightly. The most precise recollection. Yes, because I remarked upon the lateness of the hour. I said I must retire, and he laughed at me for being so conscientious. Poirot inclined his head. Did you notice anything unusual as you departed? Blackwood's tongue darted nervously across his lips. No, nothing at all. He was alive and well when I left him. That is all I know, monsieur, I swear it. Poirot's gaze rested upon him. The man trembled visibly, his hands moist, his eyes shifting. Poirot did not press further. Merci, monsieur. You may sit. Blackwood sank down, his bulk sagging as though a weight pressed upon him. Head, I understand. Merci, mademoiselle. She returned to her seat, her eyes lowered, her hands trembling upon her lap. Colonel Harrington, if you please. The retired officer sprang up, square-shouldered, his mustache bristling. Dashed bad business, Poirot. Damned bad. Never liked Ashcroft, but murder? Beastly thing. Beastly. Poirot nodded. Indeed, Colonel. But you will indulge me with your account of last night. The Colonel harumphed. Dined alone. Took a turn in the corridor about 10. Had a whiskey in the lounge. Saw Ashcroft arguing with Blackwood later, just before 11, I'd say. They went into his compartment together. After that, I retired. Didn't stir until all this devilry this morning. You are certain of the time? Certain as I can be. My watch said 10 to 11 when I finished my whiskey. Poirot observed him closely. The Colonel's manner was bluff, his tone forthright. But behind the bluster lay something more, a vigilance, a caution in his choice of words. And you heard nothing after retiring? Not a sound. Slept like a log. Merci, Colonel. Enfin, Poirot said softly. Monsieur Moreau. The artist rose with languid grace, his black hair falling in waves, his dark eyes amused. He flicked ash from his cigarette with elegant disdain. Monsieur, Poirot began, you too must tell us of your evening. Ah, my evening, monsieur. It was uneventful. I dined. I sketched a little. The storm fascinated me. The play of light and shadow, you understand. I retired about midnight. You saw Sir Reginald? Only in passing. He was a man impossible to ignore, yet hardly one to attract me. His features were, how shall I say, too coarse for art. Did you hear or notice anything unusual? Moreau shrugged. The storm, naturellement. Beyond that, nothing. Poirot studied him with narrowed eyes. Moreau's calm, his detachment. It was too perfect, too rehearsed. But Poirot merely inclined his head. Merci, monsieur. When all had always she will rise. The silence that followed was heavy, charged, electric. The train thundered on through the mist, bearing them all, inexorably, toward the moment when the truth would no longer be denied. And Hercule Poirot, his little gray cells already alight, knew that the unraveling of the sealed carriage had only just begun. Chapter 6. Contradictions Emerge. The train pressed steadily eastward, the mist thinning to reveal fields veiled in early sunlight. Yet within the midnight Continental Express the air remained dense with suspicion. Each passenger carried their own burden of thought. Some feigned indifference, others betrayed unease, and all waited with dread for Hercule Poirot's next move. The little Belgian, for his part, sat composed in the lounge, fingertips pressed together, eyes closed as though in meditation. He seemed a statue of calm. Yet behind those closed lids, the famed little gray cells busied themselves, sifting words, arranging facts, weighing silences against utterances. The testimonies of the night before were laid out like chess pieces upon his mental board, and already one piece was out of place. It was the conductor who broke the silence, bustling in with an anxious face. Monsieur Poirot, I have done as you asked. I examined the corridor last night as far as the lighting allowed. I found this. From his pocket he produced a small object wrapped in cloth. Poirot unrolled it to reveal a button. Small, round, of polished ivory, with a fragment of violet thread still clinging to its shank. Poirot's eyes glittered. Ah, so the little clue has a companion. The fragment of fabric upon the door, and now the button, also of violet. Curious, très curieux, for none among our travelers wears such a color. Unless... He glanced up. At that moment, Miss Fairchild passed through the lounge, her gray dress modest, unadorned. Yet upon her cloak, hanging by the collar, Poirot spied a faint tear. The stitching had come loose, though the cloth was not violet. See, I feared it might look ill that I, his solicitor, was with him so late. But I assure you, I left before midnight. Poirot inclined his head. Merci. Already the time narrows. Sir Reginald was alive then. And yet, within perhaps 20 minutes, he was dead. Poirot turned to Lady Eleanor, who sat serene, her hands folded in her lap. Madame, you said you retired early, about 10:30. You heard nothing? That is correct. Yet the conductor reports that at 11 o'clock he heard voices raised in your compartment. A quarrel, though the words were indistinct. How then do we reconcile this? A faint tremor passed through Lady Eleanor's composure. She inclined her head. Yes. I spoke with my husband once more. He came to me, agitated about some matter, his papers, I think. We exchanged words. It was not a quarrel, monsieur. Merely the sort of exchange to which we were accustomed. Afterwards he returned to his compartment. I remained in mine. Poirot's mustaches twitched. Ah, madame, you see? The truth, she does not conceal herself long. His eyes shifted next to Colonel Harrington, who shifted uncomfortably. Colonel, you said you retired early, about 10 minutes to 11. Yet the porter swears he saw you near the baggage carriage at midnight, speaking in low tones with another man. What explanation can you offer? The colonel's face flushed crimson. Damnation. I only stepped out for a smoke. A private matter, nothing to do with this blasted murder. Must a man account for every puff of his cigar? Poirot inclined his head. Perhaps not. Yet when murder intrudes, every moment matters. You spoke with whom, Colonel? No one. The porter is mistaken. Poirot's brows rose, but he did not press. Not yet. Finally, his gaze came to Moreau. The artist sat languid, exhaling smoke. Monsieur Moreau, you claim to have retired at midnight. Yet when I examined Sir Reginald's compartment this morning, I found upon the writing desk a small sketch, unfinished, in pencil, bearing your signature. It shows Sir Reginald's seated compartment, though he at first concealed it. Each account is shaded, colored, distorted. Why? Because each has something to hide. Perhaps not murder, but secrets nonetheless. And secrets, they are the very soil in which murder thrives. He halted, eyes glittering. And then, there is the little matter of the violet cloth. None among you wears violet, yet the fragment clung to the latch, and this button, too, bears violet thread. So, who was it that wore the garment unseen? And why should it leave its trace at the door of death? Silence fell. Lady Eleanor's hands tightened upon her lap. Miss Fairchild's eyes widened in dread. Blackwood fumbled his handkerchief. The colonel swore beneath his breath. Moreau smiled faintly. Poirot slipped the button into his pocket. The mystery deepens. But take comfort, mes amis. The little gray cells, they work always. Soon, the contradictions, they will resolve. And then, then the truth shall stand revealed. Outside, the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows through the windows of the train. But within, the shadows of suspicion only lengthened, wrapping themselves more tightly around the passengers of the midnight Continental Express. And Hercule Poirot, poised and implacable, knew that the first threads of deception had begun to unravel. Chapter 7. Shadows of Motive. The morning drew on, and with it the tension aboard the midnight Continental Express thickened like fog. The passengers, once so dignified, now bore the unmistakable pall of scrutiny. They avoided one another's eyes, spoke in whispers, and shifted in their seats whenever Hercule Poirot's gaze lingered upon them. The little Belgian detective, meanwhile, seemed the picture of serenity. He occupied a small table there, perhaps another. A friendship, tenderer, more understanding, that your husband discovered. Her cheeks colored faintly. Monsieur Poirot, you presume much. No, madame. I observe, and I perceive not hatred in you, but pride and the sting of humiliation. If your husband threatened exposure, if he sought to ruin not only your comfort but your dignity, then, you would have motive, would you not? Lady Eleanor's eyes blazed briefly, then cooled to ice. Monsieur, I did not kill my husband. Poirot inclined his head, satisfied for the moment. So you say, madame. Yet the little gray cells, they do not rest. Next he turned his attention to Mr. Blackwood, who sat hunched, twisting his handkerchief in his damp fingers. Monsieur Blackwood, Poirot said, you are a solicitor, a man of law, and yet, how ill at ease you are. Tell me, what business had Sir Reginald with you last night that could not wait until morning? Blackwood swallowed hard. He insisted upon reviewing certain contracts. He was concerned about his holdings in South America. Ah, South America. Land, yes. Concessions, investments of great value, yes, precisely. And these documents he signed, do they now rest in your possession? Blackwood fumbled in his case, producing a sheaf of papers. Poirot glanced through them, his eyes narrowing. Strange. These are deeds of transfer. Sir Reginald relinquishes shares to a new company. Your company, monsieur. Blackwood's face went crimson. It was perfectly legal. He agreed of his own will. He wished to unburden himself of them? Or was he coerced? Threatened? The solicitor stammered. He signed them, that is all that matters. Poirot's voice grew very soft. And this morning, before he could rescind, before he could reconsider, he is dead. Convenient, is it not, monsieur? Blackwood trembled, his damp brow shining. I did not kill him. I swear it upon my honor. Honor, Poirot murmured, is a word. Reginald in business, yes. We had dealings. He backed ventures, speculated in enterprises. Not always honestly, if you ask me. You quarreled with him? Damn right I did. He tricked me out of a tidy sum with one of his blasted schemes. But that was years ago. Resentments, Colonel. They do not vanish so easily. Perhaps you saw your chance at last. The Colonel's jaw tightened. I may have cursed him a dozen times, but murder? No, sir. I fight my battles in the open. Poirot's eyes glittered. And yet, you were seen last night near the baggage carriage, speaking in low tones. To whom, Colonel? The soldier flushed. None of your concern. Ah, but it is very much my concern. The truth. It cannot be hidden. The Colonel stiffened. You'll get nothing from me on that score. Poirot merely inclined his head. As you please, Colonel. But the truth, she has a way of revealing herself. Finally, Poirot turned to Moreau, who lounged gracefully with cigarette in hand, his eyes amused. Monsieur Moreau, Poirot said, you are detached, you are indifferent, or so you appear. Yet I have known many who feigned detachment while their hearts burned with passion. Tell me, what was Sir Reginald to you? Ah, monsieur, Moreau said, exhaling smoke. He was the embodiment of vulgarity. A man of commerce, of money, of power. To me, such men are but caricatures. I sketched him for amusement, nothing more. And yet, Poirot said softly, you had reason to resent him. Did he not once refuse to patronize your art? Did he not mock your work as worthless? Moreau's eyes narrowed slightly. He said once that my canvases were fit only for tavern walls. I laughed. Why should the opinion of such a man matter to me? Because, monsieur, pride is a delicate flower, and wounded pride, it may kill more surely than greed. Moreau smiled. Rise, as oil upon water. And with that, the little Belgian turned away, leaving his suspects to sit in the choking atmosphere of suspicion, their motives laid bare, their secrets half exposed, and their fears gnawing ever more deeply. The game of murder had advanced another move. Chapter 8. The Trap is Set. The lamps of the midnight Continental Express flickered with each lurch of the train, and shadows leapt across the velvet walls like dark conspirators. Outside, the storm still raged, though it had lessened from its earlier fury. The rain no longer lashed in torrents, but trickled and hissed against the carriage windows. The dawn had passed, yet a leaden pall of cloud still smothered the sky, giving the illusion that night lingered. Hercule Poirot sat in solemn silence for some minutes, his hands joined delicately at the fingertips. His eyes closed as though he might be napping. But those who had already learned to fear the glint of his gaze knew better. They observed the stillness uneasily, for the little man's mind was never idle. At length he rose. Mes amis, he said, his voice crisp as a whip-crack. It is now time. Enough of words whispered and of excuses offered. We must return to the scene of the crime. A collective shudder seemed to pass among the passengers. Lady Eleanor lowered her gaze to the floor. Blackwood fumbled with his damp handkerchief. Miss Fairchild clasped her hands so tightly her knuckles blanched. The Colonel grunted, impatient. while Moreau merely raised his brows with languid amusement. Poirot gestured to the conductor, who stood nervously at the door. "Lead the way, if you please. We shall examine the compartment of Sir Reginald Ashcroft once more, but this time with eyes that see, not merely look." The small procession moved along the corridor, their footsteps muffled upon the carpet, the rhythmic clatter of the wheels beneath them sounding like a sinister drumbeat. When the conductor unlocked the door of the fatal compartment, the stale, heavy air of death greeted them. The body had been detail small, but it tells us of violence, sudden and unhesitating. Lady Eleanor turned pale and looked away. Poirot replaced the fragment delicately and moved to the door. He examined the bolt minutely, his mustaches twitching with concentration. "Mesdames et messieurs, consider. A bolt. It cannot be fastened from without. And yet I say to you, it was fastened from without. Regardez." He demonstrated. Sliding the bolt into its groove, he then produced from his pocket a length of stiff wire, slender yet strong. With deft movements, he inserted it into the narrow gap between door and frame. A flick of his wrist, and the bolt slid back smoothly. Gasps rose from the gathered passengers. "Mon Dieu," whispered Miss Fairchild. "Yes," Poirot said, satisfied. "A simple trick, but effective. The murderer leaves the compartment, closes the door, and with such a tool, perhaps a hairpin, perhaps a length of wire, he secures the bolt. To any who discover it, the room appears sealed from within. Voila! An illusion, mes amis. A conjuring trick worthy of the theater." He allowed the silence to settle before continuing. "And so we discard the fantasy of an impossible crime. It was very possible indeed. The only question remains: who possessed both opportunity and the presence of mind to contrive such a deception?" Poirot now turned to the desk once more. He picked up Sir Reginald's pocket watch, its glass cracked, its hands stopped at 11:47. "The watch is a liar," Poirot pronounced gravely. "It ceased at the hour the murderer wished us to believe was the moment of death. But I have spoken with the train's maid, and she swears she heard Sir Reginald pacing as late as midnight. Therefore the watch was broken deliberately. An artifice." He looked sharply at Colonel Harrington. "A soldier. He knows the value of time. He would think to mislead with a false one." The colonel bristled. "Are you accusing me, sir?" No, I accuse no one. Not yet. I merely say, the false time was set. Who among you had the wit to conceive it? Of gray dust. Voila. Ash. But not from a cigar. No. This. It is from pipe tobacco. A blend with latakia, perhaps. Very distinctive." He turned slowly, his eyes resting on Colonel Harrington. "You, Colonel, are known for your pipe, are you not?" The colonel's mustache quivered. "Yes, I smoke a Balkan mixture, but that ash could have come from anywhere. I have not set foot in this compartment." Poirot merely shrugged. "Perhaps. Yet the ash lies here, where Sir Reginald met his death. We must not dismiss it." Poirot straightened, surveying the faces before him. "You see, mes amis, the room begins to speak. It tells us the crime was not a miracle, but a deception. It tells us of a false time, a false seal, a false clue in cloth. Each detail, it is a thread. And when the threads are drawn together, they will form a pattern. Already it begins to take shape." He clasped his hands behind his back, rocking gently on his heels. "Now I propose something further. We shall reconstruct. Each of you will take your place in the corridor. You will walk as you did last night, in the hours before the murder. You will recall your movements, your words, your gestures. And I, Hercule Poirot, shall watch. I shall listen. And perhaps, his voice grew softer, perhaps one of you will betray yourself. The suspects obeyed reluctantly. Lady Eleanor walked with measured steps, her gloved hands brushing against the wall. Blackwood stumbled nervously, glancing behind him as though pursued. Miss Fairchild hurried, casting fearful glances toward the shadows. The colonel strode with stiff dignity, pipe clenched tightly between his teeth. Moreau strolled with languid grace, as though the whole affair were but a farce staged for his amusement. Poirot observed each minutely, noting every hesitation, every unguarded glance. He measured the distance from their compartments to Sir Reginald's. He timed their pace. He studied the shadows cast by the lamps. When they had finished, he clapped his hands softly. Bon. We have seen the play enacted once more, and transformed. Its tables, usually so inviting with crisp linens and glittering glassware, now bore only the weight of expectation. The lamps glowed softly, casting long shadows that swayed with the rhythm of the train. The storm outside had abated, leaving behind a sullen silence broken only by the steady click and clatter of wheels upon iron rails. It was here that Hercule Poirot chose to summon his audience. One by one, the passengers filed in under his watchful gaze, each bearing the marks of sleepless hours and gnawing anxiety. Lady Eleanor Ashcroft entered first, her mourning dress immaculate, her head held high, though her eyes betrayed the strain of the past hours. Behind her shuffled Mr. Blackwood, pale and damp with nervous perspiration, his fingers forever worrying a sodden handkerchief. Miss Fairchild followed timidly, her face drawn, her step hesitant, as though she might crumple at the faintest harsh word. Colonel Harrington marched in last, mustache bristling, chest puffed in defensive defiance, while Monsieur Moreau lounged into the room with the careless air of a man attending a play, cigarette dangling from his lips. Poirot stood at the head of the carriage, hands clasped before him, his mustaches perfectly symmetrical, his eyes gleaming like polished onyx. Mesdames et messieurs, he began, at last we come to the moment of revelation. A man lies dead, Sir Reginald Ashcroft. Each of you has cause, each of you has motive, but only one of you has committed the deed. And now, he paused, letting the silence swell. We shall see which. He gestured gracefully. Pray, be seated, and listen. The suspects took their places, tense as actors awaiting their cues. Poirot paced slowly before them, his hands folding and unfolding behind his back. Let us begin at the beginning, he said softly. Sir Reginald was not a man beloved. He was arrogant, domineering, cruel. He humiliated his wife, mocked his associates, transferred great holdings into your hands. If he had lived till morning, he might have changed his mind, might have denounced your scheme. Convenient, is it not, that his voice was silenced? Blackwood dabbed his forehead, his voice trembling. He signed them of his own will. I had no reason to harm him. Poirot raised a finger. On the contrary, monsieur, you had every reason. But again, we shall not yet decide. He turned to Miss Fairchild, whose eyes darted fearfully. Mademoiselle, you are young, timid, and yet, perhaps desperation may drive even the timid to rash acts. Sir Reginald pursued you with unwelcome attentions. He threatened your peace, your honor. What would you not do to escape him? Tears welled in her eyes. I could not. I feared him, yes, but to kill, no, it is beyond me. Poirot inclined his head. Perhaps, mademoiselle, or perhaps not. We keep an open mind. His gaze fell next upon Colonel Harrington, who sat ramrod straight, his eyes hard. And you, Colonel, you were cheated by Sir Reginald in matters of finance. You are a soldier, a man of action. You smoke a particular blend of tobacco, the ash of which we found near the door of the compartment. Is this coincidence or proof? The colonel thumped the table with his fist. I may have cursed the man, yes, but I'll not have you suggest I crept about like a thief in the night. If I sought satisfaction, I'd have challenged him openly, as a gentleman. Poirot's eyes twinkled. So you say, Colonel. But death is seldom so honorable. At last his gaze settled on Moreau, who flicked his cigarette into the ashtray with delicate disdain. And you, monsieur. You laugh, you shrug, but your pride is delicate. Sir Reginald mocked your art, refused to support your ventures, and perhaps even threatened to expose dealings less than legitimate. Did you not think, if this man is gone, my path is clear? Moreau smiled languidly. Perhaps I thought it, monsieur, but to think is not to act. Besides, blood upon and forefinger. And this, mes amis, this tells another story. It was not torn from Mademoiselle Fairchild's gown as we first thought. Her dress remains whole. No, it belonged to another garment. Lady Eleanor, I think of your cloak. Lady Eleanor's lips pressed tight. And yet, Poirot continued, even this may be a false trail, planted to mislead. For what is a scrap of fabric, if not easily stolen, easily placed? He laid the fragment down, his eyes narrowing. And lastly, the ash. Pipe ash, Colonel. Distinctive, but ash too can be carried, can be scattered. Is it proof, or is it bait? The suspect shifted uneasily. Poirot stood motionless, his hands clasped behind him. You see, mes amis, the murderer was clever. He wove a tapestry of lies. A false time upon the watch, a false lock upon the door, false evidence of cloth and ash. All designed to confuse, to point in many directions. But when there are so many lies, then the truth, she stands out more clearly. He stepped forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Sir Reginald was killed swiftly, with a single thrust. The weapon was his own letter opener, at hand upon his desk. That tells us the murderer did not come armed with knife or revolver, but seized the nearest tool. A crime not long planned, but seized upon in a moment of passion, or of desperate opportunity. He paused, scanning their faces. And who, I ask, was closest to him at that moment? Who had most to gain? Who could not bear another day of humiliation, another night of scorn? Who possessed the cloak of violet? Who walked the corridor at the fatal hour? Who had access to the conductor's spare key with which to lock the door from outside? A hush fell, so heavy it seemed to smother breath. Poirot straightened to his full, if diminutive, height. Mesdames et messieurs, the murderer is among us. Soon the final veil will be lifted, and then we scowled, his mustache bristling, his chest puffed out in futile defiance. Monsieur Moreau lounged with affected indifference, though his fingers tapped restlessly upon the table. Hercule Poirot stood before them, immaculate as ever, his patent leather shoes gleaming, his mustaches symmetrical and proud. He looked less like a man than like an oracle prepared to pronounce judgment. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his voice clear, "the hour has come. I have considered the facts. I have weighed the motives, and I have examined the psychology of each of you. And now, I shall reveal the truth." A hush descended. Even the train seemed to fall silent, the wheels muffled, the wind subdued, as though the entire world leaned closer to hear. Poirot began to pace, his hands folded behind his back. "First, let us cast aside the falsehoods. The crime at first glance appeared impossible. A locked carriage, a man stabbed, no sign of entry or exit. But we have seen that this impossibility is but an illusion. The bolt could be manipulated from outside with a simple instrument, a hairpin, a piece of wire. Thus the murderer created the impression of a sealed chamber." He paused, his gaze sweeping the table. "And then, the pocket watch. Ah, that lying watch. Stopped at 11:47, it sought to deceive us. But witnesses heard Sir Reginald still moving as late as midnight. Therefore, the murderer broke the watch deliberately, to mislead." He turned suddenly to Blackwood. "Monsieur Blackwood, you, as a solicitor, understand the weight of time and contracts. It would suit you well to set a false hour, to ensure your papers could not be repudiated. You had motive in your dealings, opportunity with your late meeting, and perhaps even the cunning to attempt such deception." Blackwood's lips parted soundlessly, his hand clutching his papers. "But no." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Non, monsieur, though you are guilty of dishonesty in business, of trickery with documents, you are not guilty of murder. Your hands tremble too much." Hour of his company. In such desperation, some might strike to protect themselves. And, indeed, the fragment of violet cloth suggested suspicion upon you. But your dress remains whole. That clue does not belong to you. And though fear can drive the timid to extremes, you, mademoiselle, lacked the strength for such a deed. No, you are innocent." Miss Fairchild sobbed quietly, clasping her hands as though in prayer. Poirot's eyes narrowed as they turned upon Moreau. "Monsieur Moreau, you are charming, urbane, amused by all this. You despised Sir Reginald for his vulgarity, and perhaps feared exposure of your less than legitimate dealings. You could have struck in cold calculation, it is true. But no, you are a man of pride, of vanity. To plunge a blade with your own hand, it would stain your cuffs, as you yourself said. Too crude, too physical. No, monsieur, you are not the murderer." Moreau smiled faintly, though his shoulders eased in relief. At last Poirot turned to Lady Eleanor. His voice grew solemn. "And so, madame, we arrive at you, Lady Eleanor Ashcroft, the widow who is not yet a widow. You endured years of humiliation at the hands of your husband. He belittled you, mocked you, flaunted his affairs, and even endangered the young governess beneath your roof. You had cause, more than any, to wish him gone. Lady Eleanor's face remained composed, though her eyes glimmered with cold fire. You owned a cloak of violet hue. You say you left it in London, yet a fragment of its fabric was found at the crime scene. Perhaps you thought to plant suspicion upon the governess. But in your haste you left behind too much of yourself. You alone, madame, had access to the conductor's spare key, obtained, I think, by means of quiet persuasion. For who would deny Lady Ashcroft a simple request? With it, you secured the compartment was his ornament, his possession, never his partner. He flaunted mistresses. He crushed my dignity. He tormented the young women under our roof. And no one would dare to stop him. Not the law, not society. No one. So at last, I stopped him. She straightened, her chin high, her eyes fierce. Do you call it murder? I call it liberation. Miss Fairchild sobbed into her handkerchief. Blackwood stared in horror. The Colonel muttered darkly. Moreau exhaled smoke with a shrug, as though he had expected no less. Poirot inclined his head solemnly. Madame, I do not sit in judgment. That is for the law. But know this, the truth she always comes. Sooner or later she emerges, inevitable as the dawn. And Hercule Poirot, he merely hastens her arrival. Lady Eleanor gave a bitter smile. Then do with me what you will. I have no regret. The silence that followed was heavy, unbroken save for the ceaseless rhythm of the train. Each passenger sat lost in thought. Of guilt narrowly avoided, of secrets narrowly preserved, of the fate of one who could endure no more. Poirot looked around at them, his gaze softening. Mes amis, let this be a lesson. Murder is not born in the instant. It is born of years of bitterness, of cruelty, of wounds inflicted upon the soul. Beware the slow poison of hatred. For in time, it will demand its price. For now, the murderer is revealed, and justice will take its course. And Hercule Poirot, he may rest his little grey cells, for they have done their duty. He bowed his head, his moustaches twitching faintly, and the curtain of silence descended once more upon the midnight Continental Express. Outside, the storm had passed, and through a break in the clouds, the first pale rays of morning sun fell upon the speeding train. The mystery of the sea